Hello, TEDx Bergen. Just testing the bass here. Have you ever thought about something that crazy that it just might be the obvious thing to do? I'm Kristian, and in Google we have a moonshot factory. And what is a moonshot factory? Well, before we get into that, let's start with a quote here. Henry Ford, the father of American automotive, once said, if you asked a customer what they wanted, it would be a faster horse. Obviously, what it ended out with was a mechanical horse, which makes a lot of sense to us now. The trick is to see it at the time being. In the same way, a moonshot is a radical solution to a huge problem, such as in Henry Ford's case, building a mechanical horse and not trying to make the old horsey just go a little bit faster. It's an audacious goal, a very ambitious goal, where we want to improve things 10 times and not just an incremental improvement of a few percentages. The thing is, moonshots are not necessarily 10 times or 20 times harder to do, in theory or in practice. But when you choose to improve something only 10%, you're competing with the brightest persons in the whole world, and maybe even a few crazy ones doing moonshots. If we want to do a moonshot, we're going to have to throw out the rule book. And in Google, we hired a person to do that, to throw out that rule book and start over. His name is Astor Teller, and he heads up the Google Moonshot team. His official title is actually Captain of Moonshots, publicly and internally. So we take it seriously. Allow me to give one example of what a moonshot could be and ask for just a little bit of audience participation. Don't worry, it's not hogging and all that stuff. If you were presented with these two choices that I'm giving you now, there's an A and there's an B, what would you choose? Option A is to improve internet connectivity for the existing 2 billion users that are already online in the world. The good news here is that you have a 95% chance of succeeding. That's option A. Option B is to provide internet to the 5 billion people that are currently not connected to the internet yet. The kicker here is, that's a great goal, but you only have a 5% chance of succeeding. But of course, you will have a much greater impact. So can I see a show of hands for option A? No? Can I see a show of hands for option B? Fantastic. That's great. I'm in a room with moonshot fingers. And option B is also what we chose. The ultimate goal of this balloon is to power internet to the last 5 billion people in the world who does not currently have internet. One big problem with the world today is the geography. Mountains, for instance, where you can't put cables, or at least it would be very expensive and very hard to do so. So the only way was up. Balloons are now powering a test area in New Zealand with internet. Imagine proposing that project. And from the get-go, the project was actually called Loon, because it sounded so wacky and crazy that it maybe just was the obvious thing to do. So we did it. So you might think, yeah, but you Google, you have unlimited funds, and Astor Teller's moonshot team is sitting in a huge CSI lab with hundreds of people. But that's not the case. Astor Teller's team is not a big team sitting in a CSI-looking lab with hundreds of people. They're a very small group of clever people who brainstorm and discuss whether ideas are just slightly feasible to do, and then testing them out. literally themselves trying to get that balloon off the ground. That's actually the moonshot team. The good news is that it's actually not the biggest wallet that wins anymore. It's not necessarily the ones with the most money that can make the biggest innovations. The rule of the biggest wallet is gone. In our time, when there's always a new technology just around the corner, making something possible that we did not think yet was possible, well, it's a whole new ball game. Try and take a look at this.
When I think about the future of digital transformation, there's an old story that I find very helpful, and it's a story about the inventor of the game of chess. The legend goes that the inventor took his creation to the Emperor of India and showed him the game. And the Emperor was so impressed by the beauty and elegance of the game of chess that he said, "You can name your own reward. Majesty, I'm a humble man. All I want is a pile of rice. Put 1 grain of rice on the first square of this chessboard. Double that, put 2 grains of rice on the second square, double that, continue on. And when we've got 64 squares full of rice, just give me that quantity of rice." And the emperor says, "You really are a humble man. Make it so." Now, those of us who have had a little bit of math realize how much trouble the emperor is in, because that constant doubling adds up over time, and it reaches numbers that absolutely stagger the imagination. After 32 squares, there are a few billion grains of rice, which is a lot, but that's about as much as you would get from harvesting 1 large field. It's only when you get in the second half of the chessboard that things get really, really strange. So by the time they've covered 64 squares of the chessboard, there's a pile of rice bigger than Mount Everest, and it's more rice than has been produced by all of humanity in the entire history of the world. When the emperor realizes how badly he's been tricked by the inventor, he has the guy beheaded. He cuts off his head. So we did some quick calculations. The United States started tracking information technology as a category of corporate investment in about 1958. And if you take the normal doubling period of Moore's law as 18 months, you take 32 of those doubling periods and you add that to 1958, it turns out that we entered the second half of the chessboard when it comes to digital technology in about 2006. So since 2006, we've seen the explosion of social media. We've seen the arrival of smartphones and tablets. We've seen computers that can now drive cars. We've seen humanoid robots in factories. We have seen a computer be the world champion in the quiz show Jeopardy. All these things have happened since 2006. So to me, that means that we are in some new phase. Maybe we have just started the second half of the chessboard when it comes to the power and the impact of digital technologies. And if what I've just said is true, if there's any truth to it, there's one conclusion, and that conclusion is we haven't seen anything yet. And I firmly believe that the digital innovations that are going to come and that are going to affect the business world are going to be absolutely transformative in the not too distant future. If that's the case, the only smart strategy at the top of the enterprise is, again, to embrace and to start leading the digital transformation for your company.
We ain't seen nothing yet. So the tech development is going so fast now that we, students, companies, countries, all have to stay well ahead of the curve in the global economy, preferably by a moonshot. Because if we only take small steps, then we're at best staying status quo. Let me ask you another question. How many of you have bought an iPod, not the iPad, the iPod, the one with music in, during all times? Thank you, that's a lot of people. How many of you have bought an iPod within the last 12 months? There's one, there's two. But very few people compared to how many who bought one before that. So imagine if Apple only sold iPods and had not betted on the iPhone because they could not see that mobile technology was evolving so drastically. Now, I don't have the recipe for a moonshot, but 3 things have to be right in order to do one. The one thing that we have to fix first is the brain. We have to hack our brain to get some ideas, because we're actually programmed to do incremental thinking and linear thinking, think step by step. You probably know that. We all know that. Which, by the way, works fine for us most of the time and has done so for a long time. It just doesn't work for moonshots. So hacking your brain, and there's a lot of people who can talk a lot more about that than me. But one thing, if you're focused on an incremental to-do list, you're not going to succeed in doing a moonshot anyways. If you're tired and stressed, then you need a big hack of your brain. So people with small children like myself are already behind the curve there. The second thing is context. Now that's a much bigger problem to solve, because that's our surroundings, that's the environment, that's the society we're in. And unfortunately, big innovations are often created under a major conflict like arms or 2 superpowers race to the moon. Most companies work with short-term quarterly goals and have shareholders and investors they have to please. Or maybe they're just struggling to break even. We all know that it's, for us working in the corporate world, that it's hard to suggest to one's boss that I'm going to be working on something for the whole of next year that will most likely fail. If it succeeds, we will be maybe 10 or 20 years ahead of our competitors, so that's a hard thing. At the end of the day, we have to beat that context, and we have to somehow choose it. A thought example, I mean, you're Norway. If you just took maybe 50% of all the money you have saved up and said, we're going to spend it on research and developing or facilitating entrepreneurship, what would happen? The last thing is the perspective. And it's to find that somewhat credible, but yet still radical moonshot perspective. For instance, the problem with cars. The problem with cars is that people get in accidents. They die, they get hurt each year, so that's a very credible thing to solve. So we can move to more robust cars, we can do better brakes, airbags, and that's all great. But a radical perspective is that people are much better off not driving cars. Humans are essentially the source of the problem with car accidents. If we could take humans out of that equation, lives would be saved and productivity would be gained. You could start working the second you enter your car in the morning. There are pros and cons, but and I can reveal here that it took me 4 to 5 attempts to do my driving license. So solely because of that, you should wish for this. Now for Google, we took a bet on radar technology a few years ago, and that big data could ensure safer driving. Our driverless car now has a license in 3 states, and there's much more to come. And I think you already now seen a preview, but let's take a little look at the driverless car in real life.
Hey, Nathaniel, how are you?
Doing just great.
Go ahead, Steve.
Auto driving.
There we go.
Away we go. Look, Ma, no hands.
No hands anywhere.
No hands, no feet.
No hands, no feet, no nothing.
I love it. So we're here at the the stop sign. Yep. Cars using radars and laser to check and make sure there's nothing coming either way. I find myself looking. Old habits die hard, man. They don't die. Hey, anybody up for a taco? Yeah. What do you want to do today, Steve? I'm all for Taco Bell myself. All right. Well, let's go get a taco at the drive-thru. And we're turning into the parking lot. How neat. There we go. Now we kind of creep along here. Does anybody have any money? I've got money. No, I've got my wallet right here. You roll down your window and order a burrito. Yeah, push that up. I'm doing very well. How are you today? This is some of the best driving I've ever done.
95% of my vision is gone. I'm well past legally blind. You lose your timing in life, everything takes you much longer. There are some places that you cannot go, there are some things that you really cannot do. Where this would change my life is to give me the independence and the flexibility to go the places I both want to go and need to go when I need to do those things.
You guys get out. I've got places I have to go. Hey, it's been nice. It's been.
So, there is no doubt that in Bob Dylan's word, we all better start swimming or we'll sink like a stone. Because this tech-driven innovation is a roaring river that requires all of us to swim much faster. Hopefully, we'll be able to swim for a much longer time. Our latest moonshot is to cure aging, and hopefully, we will solve that much before it's too late for us anyways. So, if you're taking away one thing, hopefully, from this speech, I hope it's that radical change of perspective. So please, hack your brain, and to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, if not in TEDx, where else? I've been waiting a lifetime for this. I hope you choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon because that's a challenge that we have to accept and we cannot postpone it. Thank you.